Everything was perfect. Catherine's rehearsal dinner, her dream wedding just hours away, until he walked through those church doors. The man she hadn't seen in 20 years. The man who abandoned her when she needed him most. Her father. And he had the audacity to show up now. Michael tried to keep the peace, but there was no peace to keep. She told him to leave. No, she screamed it, in front of everyone. "You don't belong here," Catherine said. "You gave up that right 20 years ago." He didn't fight back. He just left. Again. But Catherine remembered when he was her hero. When he was everything. Then one morning, he was just gone. A note. That's all he left. "He left us," her mother said. "We have to be strong now." Michael asked her if she was sure. If she really wanted to ban her own father from their wedding. Catherine didn't hesitate. "He's not my father. Not anymore." Aunt Margaret pulled her aside. "Catherine, maybe you should hear him out. There might be things you don't understand." Catherine didn't want to understand. Understanding meant forgiving, and she would never forgive him. She watched him drive away. Part of her felt relief. Part of her felt empty. But she pushed that feeling down. He abandoned them. He chose to leave. This was his consequence. Pastor James found her there. "Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, Catherine," he said gently. "Some things can't be forgiven, Pastor. Some wounds are too deep." Michael drove Catherine home in silence. He knew better than to push. But the question hung in the air between them. What kind of daughter bans her father from her wedding? What could make someone do that? The answer seemed simple: abandonment. Betrayal. 20 years of silence. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice? A decision that felt right, but broke your heart anyway? We'd love to hear where you're watching from. And if you want to know how this story ends, please like this video and subscribe. Because what Catherine discovered 3 years later would change everything she thought she knew about her father. 20 years earlier, Catherine's world was simple and beautiful. Her father, David, was her hero, the man who could fix anything, who made her laugh until her sides hurt. Summer evenings meant ice cream runs and bedtime stories. Her mother, Linda, watched from the porch with a smile that said their little family was complete. David worked long hours as a construction foreman, but he always came home with energy for his little girl. "How's my princess?" he'd ask every single day, sweeping Catherine into his arms. Those were the golden days, when Catherine believed her father could do no wrong, when love felt infinite and unbreakable. Their home was filled with warmth and laughter. Linda worked part-time as a nurse while David provided for them with steady work and unwavering dedication. They weren't wealthy, but they had everything that mattered. Catherine remembered Sunday dinners where her parents would hold hands and say grace, thanking God for their blessings. Her father would wink at her across the table, making her giggle. Margaret, Linda's sister, would visit often, bringing treats and stories. Life was predictable in the best way possible. Catherine felt safe, loved, protected. She never imagined that safety could shatter so completely. Everything changed when Catherine turned 10. She started getting sick, fever that wouldn't break, weakness that kept her in bed for days. At first, doctors thought it was flu, then maybe anemia. But tests kept coming back wrong, confusing. Finally, a specialist diagnosed her with a rare autoimmune condition that was attacking her organs. The treatment would be aggressive, expensive, and there were no guarantees. David's face went pale when he heard the cost. Over $300,000 for the full treatment course. Their insurance would cover maybe half. Linda started crying right there in the doctor's office. But David squeezed Catherine's hand and promised, "We'll figure it out, princess. You're going to be okay." David became a man possessed. He took every overtime shift available, worked weekends, picked up side jobs doing renovations and repairs. Catherine would wake up at dawn to see him leaving, and he wouldn't return until after she'd gone to bed. Linda worked double shifts at the hospital. Their family car, reliable sedan David had been so proud of, got sold within a week. "We don't need it," he said simply. "We need you healthy." Catherine started her treatment, painful infusions that left her weak and nauseated. But every time she opened her eyes in that hospital room, her father was there, holding her hand, telling her stories to distract her from the pain. But Catherine didn't know the full truth. She didn't know that David had taken out loans, some from banks, others from less reputable sources. She didn't know that he'd borrowed against their house, maxed out credit cards, signed papers with interest rates that would destroy them. He shielded her from all of it. To Catherine, her father was simply working hard to help her get better. She never saw him lying awake at 3 in the morning, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how to keep their house while paying for her treatment. She never heard the phone calls from debt collectors that he'd take outside, so Linda wouldn't worry. David carried it all alone. 2 years of treatment, and finally, Catherine was declared in remission. The doctors called it a miracle. David called it answer prayers. Catherine was 12 years old, healthy again, ready to reclaim her childhood. The relief in their home was palpable. Linda cried happy tears for the first time in years. David hugged his daughter so tight she could barely breathe. "You did it, princess. You fought and you won." Catherine thought the hard part was over. She thought they could finally go back to normal. She had no idea that her recovery had cost her father everything, that the miracle of her healing had buried him under nearly $500,000 in debt. 2 months after Catherine's remission was confirmed, David disappeared. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Catherine woke up for school, came downstairs expecting breakfast. Instead, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, holding a single piece of paper, tears streaming down her face. The note was brief, almost cruel in its simplicity. "I have to go. Please forgive me. I love you both more than you'll ever know." That was it. No explanation, no forwarding address, no phone number. Just abandonment wrapped in 5 sentences. Catherine stood there in her pajamas, not understanding, not believing. "Where's Dad?" she asked. Linda couldn't even answer. The days that followed broke something inside Catherine. She kept expecting him to walk through the door, to explain that it was all a mistake, that he'd never really leave them. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Linda tried to hold everything together, working even more hours, applying for assistance, leaning on Margaret for support. Catherine withdrew into herself, grades dropping, friends forgotten. The girl who'd fought so hard to survive a deadly illness now wished she hadn't. "It's my fault," she told her mother one night. "The medical bills, the stress, I made him leave." Linda held her tight, insisting it wasn't true, but Catherine never believed her. Catherine built walls around her heart. She learned not to trust, not to rely on anyone. Her anger toward David became a protective armor. When kids at school asked about her father, she'd say coldly, "He's dead to me." She threw herself into academics, determined to prove she didn't need him, didn't need anyone. Linda watched her daughter harden, watched the sweet girl become someone fierce and guarded. Margaret tried to reach Catherine, tried to soften the rage, but Catherine refused. "He abandoned us when we needed him most," she'd say. "There's nothing to discuss." The bitterness took root deep, growing stronger with each passing year. Back in the present, the night after banishing David from the rehearsal, Catherine sat with Michael in their bedroom. He'd been patient, supportive, but now he needed to understand. "Tell me everything," he said gently. So Catherine did. She told him about the magical childhood, the devastating illness, the father who worked himself to exhaustion to save her. And then the abandonment, the note, the 20 years of silence. "He saved my life and then threw it away," she said, voice breaking. "He didn't even care enough to explain why. Just disappeared like we meant nothing." Michael held her as she cried, angry tears she'd held back for 2 decades. "I don't want him at our wedding," she whispered. "I don't want to see his face and remember how it felt when he chose to leave." Michael kissed her forehead. "Then he won't be there. This is your day, Catherine. Your choice." And that choice, she believed, was final. The wedding preparations continued without David. Catherine stood in the bridal boutique, surrounded by friends and Margaret, as the seamstress made final adjustments to her dress. It was everything she'd dreamed of, lace and silk flowing perfectly, making her feel like royalty. Her bridesmaids gushed over how beautiful she looked. But there was an empty space in the mirror, a phantom presence where a father should have stood, proud and tearful. Catherine forced herself to smile, to focus on the excitement, to push away the hollow feeling in her chest. This was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. Yet every celebration felt incomplete, tainted by the confrontation at the church. She was determined to move forward, to prove that she didn't need David, that his absence wouldn't diminish her joy. During a break, Margaret sat beside Catherine, holding her hand with quiet tenderness. "You look so much like your mother did on her wedding day," Margaret said softly. Catherine's eyes misted. Linda had passed away from cancer 2 years ago, another loss that had carved a hole in her heart. At least her mother had always been there for her, Catherine thought. At least Linda had stayed. "I wish she were here," Catherine whispered. Margaret squeezed her hand. "She is, sweetheart. She's always with you." Then Margaret hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Catherine, about your father, I know you're angry, but sometimes people do things for reasons we can't see. Sometimes love looks like abandonment when we don't know the whole story." The subtle defense of David, once again, made Catherine's jaw tighten. Catherine pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "Aunt Margaret, please don't. I know you mean well, but you didn't live through what Mom and I lived through. You didn't watch her work herself to exhaustion, trying to keep us afloat. You didn't see her cry herself to sleep night after night, wondering why her husband abandoned her. You didn't feel what it's like to be 12 years old and have your father just disappear without explanation." Margaret's expression remained patient, almost sad, as if she carried a burden she couldn't share. "You're right, I wasn't there for all of it. But I knew your mother better than anyone, Catherine, and I knew your father too. He loved you more than his own life." Catherine shook her head firmly. "If that were true, he would have stayed. Love doesn't abandon. Love doesn't disappear without a word." That evening, Catherine and Michael went through the final wedding details at their apartment. Seating charts, music selections, menu choices. Michael handled everything with calm efficiency, but he kept glancing at Catherine, reading the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. "You're thinking about him," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Catherine set down the seating chart with more force than necessary. "I can't help it. Margaret keeps defending him, like there's some noble reason for what he did. But there isn't, Michael. He left us with nothing. No explanation, no support, just gone. And now everyone acts like I'm being unreasonable for not wanting him at my wedding." Michael moved closer, wrapping an arm around her. "Do you want to know why he came back? Maybe hearing his side would give you closure, help you move past this anger." "No," Catherine said immediately, her voice hard. "I don't want his excuses. Whatever reason he has, it won't change what he did. It won't give me back those 20 years of wondering if I did something wrong, if I wasn't good enough for him to stay. It won't bring back my mother, who died still wondering why her husband left, who never dated again because part of her was still waiting for him to come back and explain." She paused, voice cracking slightly despite her anger. "Mom never got closure, Michael. She died without knowing why he abandoned us. And I won't give him the satisfaction of explaining himself to me when he couldn't do it for her. He doesn't deserve that chance." Michael nodded slowly, understanding her pain, even if he wondered privately if she was making the right choice. That night, Catherine lay awake long after Michael fell asleep. Her mind wouldn't quiet, replaying the confrontation at the church over and over. The look on David's face when she'd screamed at him, the way he'd simply accepted her rejection without fighting back, without even trying to explain. Why hadn't he fought? Why hadn't he demanded to be heard? The silence was almost worse than the abandonment itself. Catherine turned on her side, watching the moonlight paint patterns on the wall. Part of her, a small treacherous part she tried to ignore, wanted to know the truth. But wanting to know and being ready to forgive were two different things. She'd built her life on the foundation of his betrayal, used her anger as fuel to succeed, to prove she didn't need him. What would she be without that anger? Who would she be if she forgave him? The next morning, Catherine stood in the kitchen making coffee when she noticed the wedding invitation on the counter. Her name and Michael's, beautifully engraved, announcing their union. Traditionally, the bride's father's name would appear there too, giving his blessing, presenting his daughter. Catherine's invitation listed only her and Michael. It had been her choice, her insistence. Yet seeing it now, the absence felt glaring, like a missing tooth that her tongue couldn't stop probing. She thought about all the father-daughter moments she'd miss at the wedding. No one to walk her down the aisle except Margaret. No father-daughter dance. No toast from proud dad. These absences should have felt like victories, proof that she didn't need him. Instead, they felt like holes in an otherwise perfect picture, spaces that couldn't quite be filled by anyone else, no matter how much she pretended otherwise. At a planning meeting with Pastor James, the kind minister who'd known Catherine since she was a teenager, the subject of her father came up again. The pastor had heard about the confrontation at the rehearsal through the church grapevine. "I understand your father attended the rehearsal," Pastor James said gently, his tone carefully neutral. Catherine tensed immediately, her defenses rising. "He did. He won't be at the wedding." The pastor nodded slowly, folding his weathered hands on the desk. "Forgiveness is one of the hardest commandments, Catherine, but it's also one of the most important. Not for the other person's sake, necessarily, but for our own. Bitterness is a poison we drink hoping someone else will suffer from it. In the end, we're the ones who pay the price." Catherine met his eyes firmly, her jaw set. "With respect, Pastor, some things are unforgivable. Some wounds are too deep to heal." Pastor James smiled sadly, the expression of someone who'd seen too much pain in his decades of ministry. "I've been a pastor for 30 years, Catherine. I've seen marriages destroyed, families shattered, lives ruined by choices both terrible and desperate. And I've learned that we rarely know the full story of anyone's actions. We judge based on what we see, what we feel, but God sees the heart. He knows the reasons, the circumstances, the impossible choices people sometimes face." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not asking you to reconcile with your father. That's between you and him, a decision only you can make. But I'm asking you to examine your heart honestly. Are you holding on to this anger because it's just, or because it's familiar? Because sometimes the hardest prisons to escape are the ones we build ourselves, the ones where we're both the prisoner and the jailer." Catherine looked away, his words hitting closer to home than she wanted to admit. That night, Catherine found herself looking through old photo albums she'd kept boxed away for years. Pictures of her childhood, her father's face smiling in dozens of shots. Catherine as a toddler on his shoulders at the zoo. Her first day of school, David beaming with pride beside her. Father and daughter at the park, at her elementary school graduation, at a dozen ordinary moments that had once felt magical. In every photo, he was looking at her with such pure love it made her chest ache. This was the man who'd abandoned her? How did someone go from this devoted father to just walking away without explanation? Michael sat beside her quietly, offering support without words. "I don't understand," Catherine whispered, touching one photo where David held her as a baby. "How could the person in these pictures just leave? What happened to him?" But there were no answers in the photographs, only questions that would haunt her until she was finally ready to hear the truth. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and gentle sunshine that seemed like a blessing from above. Catherine sat in the bridal suite of an elegant hotel, surrounded by her bridesmaids, as a makeup artist worked magic on her face. Champagne flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and the energy was electric with anticipation and joy. Yet beneath Catherine's carefully applied smile, there was a knot of tension she couldn't quite shake loose. She kept glancing at her phone, though she didn't know what she was expecting to see. A message? An apology? Some final attempt from David to reach her before the ceremony? But there was nothing, just silence. The absence felt both like relief and disappointment, though she'd never admit the latter to anyone, barely even to herself. Margaret moved through the room gracefully, helping with last-minute details, her presence both comforting and complicated given their recent conversations about forgiveness and hidden truths. When Catherine finally put on her wedding dress, the entire room went silent. Even the most talkative bridesmaid stopped mid-sentence, tears welling in her eyes as she took in the vision before her. The dress fit absolutely perfectly, transforming Catherine into something magical, a bride from a fairy tale. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears that threatened to spill over. "Oh, Catherine," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You look just like your mother did on her wedding day. She would be so incredibly proud of you right now." The comparison brought both joy and piercing sadness. Catherine wished desperately that Linda could be there, could see this moment, could help her get ready the way mothers are supposed to do for their daughters. The absence of both parents felt like a weight on her chest, making it momentarily hard to breathe despite all the joy and celebration surrounding her. The church looked absolutely magnificent, transformed into something from a dream. White roses and lilies adorned every available surface, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness and promise. Guests arrived in their finest clothes, greeting each other with excitement and anticipation, their collective happiness creating an atmosphere of pure celebration. Inside the sanctuary, everything had been prepared with meticulous care. Candles flickered in elegant holders, ribbons flowed gracefully from the ends of pews, and soft music played as people found their seats. Michael waited at the altar with his groomsmen, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his perfectly tailored suit, his eyes constantly drifting toward the door where his bride would soon appear. Pastor James stood ready at the front, his kind face beaming with joy for the couple he'd counseled and prepared for this sacred moment. Everything was absolutely perfect, except for the empty seats in the front row where David should have been sitting, a void that seemed to echo louder than all the surrounding joy. In the church vestibule, Catherine stood with Margaret, who would walk her down the aisle in David's place. The older woman looked beautiful in her elegant dress, carefully chosen to honor the importance of her role, but there was unmistakable sadness in her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Margaret said again, adjusting Catherine's veil with gentle, practiced hands. "And your father would be too, wherever he is right now." Catherine's jaw tightened instinctively at the mention of David, but she forced herself not to respond with anger. This was not the time or place for that conversation, not when she was minutes away from walking down the aisle to marry the love of her life. The opening notes of the bridal march began, the music that would signal her entrance and the beginning of her new life. Margaret linked her arm through Catherine's, squeezing gently with understanding and support. "Ready, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Catherine took a deep breath, pushing down all the complicated emotions swirling inside her chest. "Ready," she said with determination. The sanctuary doors opened wide, and Catherine stepped into a scene that took her breath away. Every guest stood in respect, turning to watch her entrance, their faces reflecting genuine awe and happiness. Flowers lined the aisle, candles created a warm glow, and everything looked exactly as she'd imagined during months of planning. But Catherine only had eyes for Michael, who stood at the altar looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever prayed, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen in his entire life. His eyes glistened with tears of joy, and she could see his chest rising and falling with barely contained emotion. As she walked down that long aisle with Margaret at her side, Catherine felt the full weight and beauty of the moment, the significance of committing her life to this man who had shown her what real, stable, unwavering love looked like after so many years of pain and abandonment. When they reached the altar, Margaret kissed Catherine's cheek tenderly and placed her hand in Michael's, symbolically giving her blessing and fulfilling a role that should have belonged to someone else. Pastor James began the ceremony with beautiful words about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage that they were about to enter. His voice was warm and steady, filling the church with wisdom earned from decades of ministry and countless weddings. "Love is patient, love is kind," he recited from 1 Corinthians. "It is not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs." Those last words pierced Catherine's heart unexpectedly. Keeps no record of wrongs. Was that what she'd been doing all these years with David? Keeping a detailed, meticulous record of his wrongs, nurturing them, letting them define her identity and fuel her anger? She pushed the uncomfortable thought away quickly, focusing instead on Michael's hands holding hers tenderly, his thumbs gently stroking her skin in a gesture of reassurance and devotion that grounded her in the present moment. When it came time for vows, Michael spoke first, his voice thick with emotion that he didn't try to hide. "Catherine, you are the strongest, most beautiful person I've ever known. You've overcome so much in your life, survived things that would have broken other people completely. Your strength and resilience inspire me every single day. I promise to stand beside you always, to be your partner in every storm and every celebration we face together. I promise to love you not just in the easy, happy moments, but especially in the hard ones too. Whatever comes our way, we face it together as a team. You'll never be alone again. I swear that to you." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she listened to his promises, the vow of never being alone again, striking something deep and raw inside her heart. When it was her turn, she spoke through tears that she didn't bother wiping away. "Michael, you taught me what love really means after years of not understanding it. You showed me that I could trust again, that I was worthy of devotion and commitment. I promise to love you with everything I have, to build a life with you that's filled with joy and purpose and meaning. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying when others didn't. By the power vested in me by God and the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor James declared with a broad, genuine smile spreading across his kind face. "Michael, you may kiss your bride." Michael pulled Catherine close with tender passion, kissing her as the congregation erupted in applause and cheers, their joy filling the sanctuary with sound and energy. In that perfect moment, Catherine felt pure, untainted happiness flooding through her. She was married. She had found real love despite everything painful in her past. She had built something beautiful and meaningful from the ashes of her broken childhood. Hand in hand, she and Michael walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, smiling radiantly at their guests, waving to friends and family, beginning their new life together with hope and promise. The reception hall awaited them, decorated even more beautifully than the church, ready to host a celebration of love and new beginnings and all the possibilities their future held together. The reception was everything Catherine had hoped for and more, exceeding even her carefully planned expectations. The ballroom sparkled with thousands of tiny lights and elaborate decorations, tables set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light, a dance floor polished to mirror perfection, waiting for celebration. When she and Michael made their grand entrance as Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, the room absolutely exploded with celebration and love. Music filled every corner of the space. Champagne flowed freely from elegant bottles, and laughter echoed off the walls, creating a symphony of happiness. Catherine's face hurt from smiling so much, her heart feeling full to bursting with joy and gratitude. They shared their first dance as husband and wife, swaying together to a song they'd carefully chosen for its meaning, Michael whispering sweet words in her ear that made her laugh and cry at the same time. Friends came forward throughout the evening with heartfelt toasts, sharing stories both funny and deeply touching, celebrating the love that had brought everyone together under one roof. For hours, Catherine forgot about everything painful and complicated, losing herself completely in the joy of her perfect wedding day. When it came time for Margaret's speech, the older woman stood at the microphone with carefully prepared words and barely contained emotion. She spoke beautifully about watching Catherine grow up, about Linda's fierce love for her daughter, and the pride she'd felt watching Catherine overcome every obstacle life had thrown at her. Catherine has built an absolutely beautiful life through sheer determination, courage, and an iron will, Margaret said, her voice wavering with feeling. She's faced loss and pain that would have destroyed people with less strength. And through everything, she's remained true to herself, never compromising her values or her vision for the future she wanted to build. Then Margaret paused, and her next words carried a weight that Catherine couldn't quite identify, a meaning that seemed to hover just beyond her understanding. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we never see happening in the shadows. Sometimes people sacrifice everything for those they love, and that sacrifice goes completely unrecognized, misunderstood, or even condemned. But true love doesn't require recognition or applause. It simply loves, quietly and completely, asking for nothing in return. Catherine frowned slightly, wondering once again if Margaret was making another veiled reference to David, even here on her wedding day, even now when everything should be about her and Michael and their future together. But she pushed the thought away, refusing to let it darken even one moment of her perfect celebration. 3 years passed like a dream. Catherine and Michael built a beautiful life together, filled with love, laughter, and the kind of partnership Catherine had once thought impossible. Their careers flourished, their marriage grew stronger, and now they were preparing for their greatest adventure yet. Catherine was 5 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they'd already named Daniel. The pregnancy glow suited her, softening the edges that years of pain had sharpened. They just purchased their first home, a charming house in a quiet neighborhood perfect for raising a family. But before they could fully move in, there was one difficult task remaining. They needed to clean out and sell Linda's old house, the home where Catherine had grown up, where so many memories, both beautiful and painful, still lingered in every corner. Walking into her childhood home felt like stepping through a portal into the past. Catherine moved slowly through rooms that hadn't changed much since she'd left for college. The furniture was the same, though covered now in dust and sheets. Family photos still hung on walls, frozen moments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Michael worked downstairs, sorting through kitchen items and paperwork, giving Catherine space to process the emotions flooding through her. She ran her hand along the banister where she used to slide as a child, remembering her father's laughter when he'd catch her at the bottom. The house smelled like memories, like loss, like all the years that had passed since everything fell apart. Catherine had been avoiding this task for 2 years since her mother's death, but pregnancy had given her a deadline. They needed to sell, needed to move forward, needed to finally close this chapter. Catherine made her way to the attic, a space she hadn't entered in over a decade. The narrow stairs creaked under her weight, and she had to move carefully, one hand protectively on her belly. The attic was exactly as she remembered, cramped and hot, filled with boxes and old furniture that had been relegated to storage and forgotten. Dust particles danced in the single beam of sunlight coming through a small window. Catherine began sorting through boxes methodically, finding old school projects, Christmas decorations, her mother's nursing textbooks. Each item told a story, brought back a memory. She was about to call it a day when she noticed something wedged behind a stack of boxes in the far corner, almost deliberately hidden. It was a wooden box, locked with a small padlock, covered in years of dust. Catherine's heart began to race inexplicably as she pulled it free. Catherine searched nearby boxes and found a small key taped inside an envelope with her mother's handwriting. For Catherine, when she's ready. Her hands trembled as she fitted the key into the lock. It resisted at first, rust making it difficult, but finally the lock clicked open. Inside the box were letters, hundreds of them, bundled with rubber bands and organized by date. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Every envelope was addressed to her in handwriting she recognized instantly, handwriting she hadn't seen in 20 years. Her father's handwriting. The earliest letter was dated the week David had left. Catherine's vision blurred with tears as she picked up the first bundle, her whole body shaking. Her mother had kept these? Had hidden them? Why? Catherine's mind raced with questions as she carefully opened the first letter, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. My dearest Catherine, the first letter began. I'm writing this from a motel room 2 states away, and my heart is breaking with every word. Leaving you and your mother is the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than anything I thought possible. But it's the only way to save you both. Catherine's hand shook as she continued reading. 3 weeks ago, I received devastating news. The doctors found something during a routine check, a serious condition that will require ongoing treatment and monitoring. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it's chronic and expensive. Between your medical bills and now this, I saw our family drowning. Catherine's breath caught. Her father had been sick too. The medical bills from your illness buried us deeper than you know. I took out loans, borrowed from everyone I could, even made deals with loan sharks and predatory lenders. By the time you recovered, I owed nearly $500,000. Catherine tore through more letters, her hands shaking as the full truth emerged. Then came my diagnosis, David had written. Another financial burden on top of everything else. The collectors were threatening to take the house, to destroy your mother's credit, to ruin any chance you had in normal life. I researched every option, consulted lawyers secretly, and discovered something. If I disappeared completely, filed for abandonment, your mother could divorce me and claim my life insurance policy from my job without my debts following her. The insurance was substantial, enough to clear everything and give you both security. My own condition could be managed with basic care, but only if I wasn't also drowning in debt. Catherine sobbed as she read. So I made the choice. I took all the debt with me, worked grueling jobs to pay it off, managed my health issues alone, lived in poverty so you could have everything. I sacrificed my relationship with you so you could have a future. Letter after letter revealed David's sacrifice in heartbreaking detail. He'd worked 3 jobs simultaneously while managing his chronic condition, slept in his car to save money, skipped his own medical appointments to afford debt payments. He wrote about the physical toll of working so hard while sick, the exhaustion, the pain he endured alone. He wrote about attending her high school graduation from the back of the auditorium, unseen, crying with pride even as his body ached. He wrote about tracking her college acceptance, her career success, her engagement, all from a distance while struggling with his health. Every day away from you was agony, made worse by being sick and alone. But every day you were safe and thriving made it worth it. I carried the financial burden that would have crushed you, and I dealt with my illness privately, so you never had to worry. That's what fathers do. They protect their children, even when it costs them everything. Catherine collapsed against the attic wall, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Everything she believed for 20 years was shattered. Her father hadn't abandoned them out of selfishness. He'd been diagnosed with a serious illness, buried under debt from saving her life, and had made the most selfless choice imaginable. He'd sacrificed his health, his happiness, his relationship with his daughter, working himself sick to clear their debts and secure their future through his life insurance. He'd managed a chronic condition alone, without family support, so they wouldn't have to bear that burden too. And she'd repaid his sacrifice with 20 years of hatred. She'd banned him from her wedding. She'd screamed at him in front of everyone that he was dead to her. The guilt was crushing, suffocating. "Oh God," she whispered between sobs. "He was sick. He's been sick and alone this whole time, and I called him a coward. What have I done?" Michael heard her crying and rushed up the attic stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He found Catherine surrounded by letters, her face streaked with tears and dust, her body shaking with sobs. "Catherine, are you okay? Is it the baby?" He dropped to his knees beside her, hands immediately going to her belly in concern. Catherine shook her head, unable to speak, just pushing letters into his hands. Michael's eyes widened as he began reading, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to heartbreak as he absorbed the truth. The diagnosis, the impossible debt, the sacrificial choice, the years of silent suffering, working while sick, managing a chronic condition alone. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Catherine, your father. He gave up everything. He's been sick all these years, dealing with it alone to protect you." Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried 20 years of grief, regret, and devastating understanding. Downstairs in the kitchen, after Catherine had cried herself into exhaustion, they sat reading the most recent letters. The last one was dated 6 months ago. "I finally did it," David had written. "After 20 years, the debt is completely cleared. Every penny paid. My health condition is stable with medication, and I'm managing. Linda and Catherine are free from the burden that would have destroyed their lives. I kept my promise, even if it cost me my relationship with my daughter and decades of struggling with illness alone. I'm getting older now, worn down from years of grueling labor while sick. But I'm at peace knowing Catherine has a beautiful life. My only prayer is that someday she might understand and forgive me." Catherine stood abruptly, determination replacing devastation. "I have to find him, Michael. Right now. I need to tell him I'm sorry, that I understand, that I love him. He's been dealing with his condition alone for 20 years. What if his health is failing? What if I'm too late?" Michael grabbed his keys. "We'll find him, Catherine. Whatever it takes." Catherine couldn't stop reading. Her hands trembled as she tore through letter after letter, each one revealing another layer of truth that shattered everything she believed for 20 years. The second letter, dated just days after David had left, went into excruciating detail about the financial devastation his family faced. "The treatment for your illness cost over $300,000, he'd written in careful, measured script. The insurance company covered about 40% after deductibles and maximums. That left us with nearly $200,000 in medical debt. But that was just the beginning, my darling girl. That was just what the hospital billed us directly." Catherine's vision blurred as tears poured down her face, but she forced herself to keep reading. She needed to know. She needed to understand the full scope of what her father had done. "The insurance didn't cover the experimental treatments that saved your life," David's letter continued. "They deemed them not medically necessary, even though without them, the doctors said you had maybe 6 months. So I found the money elsewhere. I took out personal loans from 3 different banks, maxed out every credit card we had, borrowed from friends and family who could spare it. When that wasn't enough, I went to payday lenders. And when even that wasn't enough, I made a choice I'll regret forever but would make again in a heartbeat. I borrowed from a loan shark." Catherine's breath caught in her throat, her hand flying to her mouth. A loan shark. Her father had gone to criminals to save her life. "The interest rates were astronomical," the letter went on. 30, 40, sometimes 50%. "But you were dying, Catherine. What was I supposed to do? Let my little girl die because I was too proud or too scared to do whatever it took." The next letter detailed the crushing weight of the debt that followed Catherine's recovery. "By the time you were healthy again, by the time we got that miracle we prayed for, I owed $480,000, David had written. Nearly $500,000 in debt, with interest compounding daily. The collection calls started immediately. 3, 4, 5 times a day. They called your mother at work. They called our house at all hours. They threatened to garnish wages, to put liens on the house, to take everything we had." Catherine sobbed harder, imagining her parents living under that crushing pressure while trying to maintain normalcy for her sake. The worst were the men from the loan shark. They weren't making phone calls. They showed up at my work. They followed me to the grocery store. They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't pay, and those threats included you and your mother. Catherine's hands shook as she grabbed another letter, this one dated 3 months after David had left. "I spent weeks researching, Catherine. I consulted with lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who might have a solution. And I finally found one, though it broke my heart. If I legally separated from your mother through abandonment, if I disappeared completely and she filed for divorce after the required waiting period, my debts couldn't touch her or you. The law protected divorced spouses from debt incurred solely in the other spouse's name. But it only worked if I was completely gone, if there was no financial connection between us anymore." The letter continued, each word like a knife to Catherine's heart. "More than that, I had a life insurance policy through my job. A good one, worth nearly $600,000. If I was legally separated and the debts were in my name alone, Linda could claim that insurance without the creditors being able to touch it. That money could clear everything and give you both a fresh start." Another letter revealed the cold calculation behind David's sacrifice. "I did the math 1,000 times, sweetheart. If I stayed, we'd lose the house within 6 months. Your mother's wages would be garnished. Your college fund, what little we'd managed to save, would be seized. The men from the loan shark had made it clear they'd come after our family assets if I didn't pay. We'd declare bankruptcy, but even that wouldn't clear all the debt, especially not what I owed to the criminals. You and your mother would spend years, maybe decades, climbing out of that hole. You'd never be able to get student loans for college. Your mother would work until she died and still owe money. Catherine could barely see through her tears. But if I left, if I took all the debt with me and worked to pay it off alone, you'd be free. Linda could use the insurance money to clear any remaining joint accounts and give you a future. It was the only way to save you both from the consequences of my desperate choices. The following letters chronicled David's life after leaving, and each one destroyed Catherine further. I'm working 3 jobs now, one letter read, dated a year after his departure. Janitorial work at an office building from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Construction day, labor from 8 until 4. And I stock shelves at a warehouse from 6 until 10 at night. I sleep in my car between shifts, maybe 4 hours total. I eat 1 meal a day, usually whatever I can get cheapest. Every single dollar beyond basic survival goes to paying down the debt. Catherine sobbed, imagining her father living that nightmare existence while she'd hated him. I'm working under assumed names to keep the creditors from finding me before I can pay them off. It's not legal, but it's necessary. I need to pay off the sharks first, before they come looking for you and your mother. More letters revealed the physical toll of David's sacrifice. My health condition is getting worse. One letter admitted, dated 5 years after he'd left. The doctor said I needed to reduce stress and physical labor, but I can't. The debt is still over $300,000. I'm managing the condition with the cheapest medications I can find, skipping appointments I can't afford, pushing through the pain because stopping means you and your mother aren't safe yet. Catherine's heart shattered as she read about her father working himself sick, quite literally destroying his body to pay off debt he'd incurred saving her life. Some days the pain is so bad I can barely move. But then I think about you, about the life you're building, about college and your dreams of becoming an architect, and I find the strength to keep going. Every payment I make is another brick in the foundation of your future, Catherine. I'll build that foundation even if it kills me. Through her tears, Catherine read letters about David watching her live from a distance. I stood in the back of the auditorium at your high school graduation. One letter said, I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses so you wouldn't recognize me. When they called your name and you walked across that stage, I cried so hard I had to leave before the ceremony ended. You looked so beautiful, so strong, so accomplished. Everything I'd hoped you'd become. Every sacrifice was worth it in that moment. Another letter, dated years later, read, I saw the announcement of your college acceptance in the local paper. Cornell University, architecture program. I sat in my car and cried for an hour. My little girl, going to one of the best schools in the country. The debt was down to $100,000 by then. I doubled my hours, worked even harder. You were going to have everything you deserved, no matter what it cost me. Catherine found the letters from recent years, tracking David's final push to clear the debt. 15 years of payments, Catherine, and I finally did it. The last payment cleared yesterday. Every single dollar of that $480,000, plus all the compounded interest that nearly doubled it, is paid off. You and your mother are completely free. The loan sharks are satisfied. The banks are settled. The credit cards are closed. I kept my promise. The letter was dated 3 years ago, just before her wedding. Catherine's hands shook violently. He'd finished paying it off right before her wedding. That's why he'd come, not to ruin her day, but to finally see his daughter on the happiest day of her life, now that he'd completed his mission. I know you probably won't want me there, the letter continued. But I had to try. I had to see you happy, just once, even if you hate me, even if you never know what I did for you. Your happiness is enough. The weight of the truth crushed Catherine completely. Her father had sacrificed everything. 20 years of his life, his health, his happiness, his relationship with his daughter. He'd worked himself to the breaking point, managing a chronic illness alone, living in poverty and isolation, all to pay off debt he'd incurred saving her life. He'd taken on loan sharks and criminals to give her a future, then spent 2 decades paying the price for that desperate choice. And she'd repaid him with hatred. She'd called him a coward. She'd banned him from her wedding. She'd screamed at him in front of everyone that he was dead to her, and he'd simply accepted it because he believed he deserved her hatred. Oh God, Catherine sobbed, her whole body shaking. He gave up everything. Everything. He lived in hell for 20 years to save me, and I never knew. I never gave him a chance. What have I done? What have I done? The guilt was suffocating, unbearable, but beneath it burned a desperate determination. She had to find him. She had to tell him she understood. Before it was too late. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, phone on speaker, as she confronted Margaret with trembling voice. "You knew," she said, not accusing but desperate to understand. "All these years, you knew the truth." Margaret's voice cracked through the speaker. "Yes, sweetheart. I knew. Your mother told me everything shortly before she died. She couldn't carry the secret alone anymore, and she needed someone to make sure you eventually found those letters." There was a long pause filled with the sound of Margaret crying softly. "Linda made me promise not to tell you directly. She said David had sacrificed too much for his truth to come from anyone but him. He wanted you to read his own words, to understand his choices without intermediaries. Your mother honored that wish, even though keeping the secret destroyed her a little more each day." Margaret continued, her voice heavy with years of carrying the burden. "Your father made Linda promise something else too. He made her swear that you would never know the truth until after he'd completely cleared all the debts. He didn't want your pity, Catherine. He didn't want you feeling guilty or obligated to help him. He wanted to do this alone, to prove that his sacrifice was genuine and selfless, not a manipulation for sympathy." Catherine's tears flowed faster as she listened. "David told Linda that if you ever learned the truth while he was still struggling, you'd try to help, and that would defeat the entire purpose of what he'd done. He'd left so you could be free, so you could build your life without the weight of his choices crushing you. Telling you before he finished would just transfer that burden back onto your shoulders." "Your mother struggled with that promise every single day," Margaret said softly, "especially when you started hating your father, when you built your life around that anger. Linda wanted so badly to defend him, to tell you the truth, but she'd given her word. She believed in what David was doing, even though it cost her everything too. She never dated again, never even looked at another man. Part of her was waiting for David to finish his mission, hoping they could reunite once the debt was clear. But the cancer came first." Margaret's voice broke completely. "She died still keeping his secret, Catherine. Her last words to me were, make sure she finds the letters when she's ready. Make sure she knows her father is a hero." "Aunt Margaret," Catherine said through her tears, voice shaking with urgency. "Do you know where he is? Please, I need to find him. I need to tell him I understand, that I'm sorry, that I love him." There was a painful silence on the other end of the line. "The last I heard from him was about a year ago," Margaret finally said. "He sent me a letter, told me the debt was finally cleared. He said he was living somewhere in the Midwest, working odd jobs, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But he didn't give a specific address, Catherine. I think he was afraid I'd tell you, and he still wasn't ready for that confrontation. He said he'd reach out when the time was right, but that time never came." Catherine's heart sank. A year ago, he could be anywhere by now. After the call with Margaret ended, Michael opened his laptop and began the search. As an attorney, he had access to databases and resources most people didn't. He searched for David Anderson, cross-referencing age, previous addresses, employment records. Catherine sat beside him, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other gripping Michael's arm as they tracked down lead after lead. "There are dozens of David Andersons in the system," Michael said, scrolling through results. "But we can narrow it down by age and last known location." Hours passed. Catherine's exhaustion warred with her desperate need to find her father. Every dead end felt like another betrayal, another moment wasted when she should have been searching for him years ago. "Wait," Michael said suddenly, his fingers stopping on a particular entry. "David Anderson, age 58, last known employment at a warehouse distribution center in Marietta, Ohio, terminated 6 months ago. Previous employment shows a pattern of manual labor jobs across multiple states over the past 20 years, all under slight variations of his name. This has to be him." Catherine's breath caught. "Ohio," Margaret said Midwest. "This could really be him." Michael pulled up more information. The employment ended 6 months ago, but there's no new address on file. He seems to have moved without leaving a forwarding address. But at least we have a starting point. Catherine was already standing, despite the late hour and her exhaustion. We need to go there. Now, what if he's sick? What if he needs help and has no one? They didn't wait for a reasonable hour. At 4 in the morning, Catherine and Michael threw clothes into bags, gathered the letters, and prepared for the journey. Michael tried to convince Catherine to wait until after sunrise, to rest for the baby's sake, but she refused. "I've wasted 20 years already," she said, her voice fierce with determination. "I'm not wasting another minute. My father has been alone and suffering for 2 decades because of choices he made to save me. He came to my wedding hoping just to see me happy, and I humiliated him. I screamed at him. I told him he was dead to me, and he accepted it, Michael. He accepted it because he thought he deserved it. I need to find him before another day passes." The drive to Marietta, Ohio would take 6 hours. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, the bundle of letters in her lap, rereading passages as Michael drove through the darkness. Each word cut deeper now that she understood the full context. Her father's careful explanations, his justifications for abandoning her, his expressions of love tangled with apologies for causing her pain. "He apologizes in every single letter," Catherine said aloud, her voice hollow with grief. "In every one, he says he's sorry for leaving, sorry for the pain, sorry for being a failure. But he wasn't a failure. He was the opposite. He was a hero, and I called him a coward." Michael reached over, squeezing her hand. "You didn't know, Catherine. That was the whole point of his sacrifice. He didn't want you to know." As the sun rose, painting the highway in shades of gold and pink, Catherine stared out the window, her mind replaying her entire life through this new lens of understanding. Every birthday her father had missed, he'd been working multiple jobs to pay down debt. Every Christmas without him, every school event, every milestone, he'd been sacrificing for her future. The wedding he'd tried to attend had been his attempt to see his daughter happy one last time after finally completing his 20-year mission. And she'd rejected him publicly, cruelly, in front of everyone. The memory made her physically ill. How could she have been so blind? How could she have never questioned her simple narrative of abandonment? Pastor James had tried to tell her about forgiveness. Margaret had hinted at hidden truths. Even Michael had suggested there might be more to the story. But she'd refused to listen, too wrapped up in her anger to see any other possibility. They stopped at a rest area for Catherine to stretch and use the restroom. Standing by the car, Catherine checked her phone obsessively, as if David might somehow call, as if the universe might provide a sign pointing her in the right direction. "What if we can't find him?" she whispered to Michael, fear creeping in her voice for the first time. "What if he's moved somewhere we'll never track him down? What if his health has gotten worse and he's alone somewhere, thinking his daughter hates him?" Michael pulled her close, careful of her pregnant belly. "We'll find him, Catherine. Even if it takes months, years, we'll find him. And when we do, you'll tell him everything you need to say. You'll make sure he knows he's loved, that his sacrifice wasn't in vain, that his grandson will know what an incredible man his grandfather is. We won't stop searching until we find him. I promise you that." Marietta, Ohio, was a small town that time seemed to have forgotten, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. Catherine and Michael drove slowly through tree-lined streets, past modest homes with well-kept lawns and American flags hanging for porches. The warehouse where David had last worked was on the industrial edge of town, a sprawling complex surrounded by chain-link fencing and concrete. Catherine's heart pounded as they pulled into the parking lot. This was where her father had worked, where he'd spent his days doing manual labor despite his chronic illness, all to finish paying off the debt that had defined 2 decades of his life. The building looked cold and impersonal, a stark reminder of the sacrifice David had made in places just like this all across the country. Michael went inside while Catherine waited in the car, too emotional to trust herself to speak coherently. Through the window, she watched him talk to someone at the front desk, saw them pull up records on a computer, saw the office manager shake her head. When Michael returned, his expression was carefully controlled, which told Catherine the news wasn't entirely good. "He worked here until about 6 months ago," Michael said gently, sliding back into the driver's seat. The manager, Patricia, remembered him well. Said he was one of their best workers, always on time, never complained, even though she could tell he was in pain sometimes. She noticed he had trouble with his hands, arthritis probably from years of physical labor, and that he moved slower than the younger workers. But he never asked for accommodations or special treatment. What else did she say? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael hesitated, then continued. She said your father was quiet, kept to himself mostly, but the few times he talked about personal things, he mentioned a daughter. Said she was an architect, that she was successful and happy, and that was all that mattered to him. Patricia said she asked him once why he didn't reach out to you, and he told her that some sacrifices require distance, that the greatest gift a parent can give is freedom, even if it means being forgotten. Catherine's tears spilled over. Even here, even with strangers, David had spoken of her with pride and love, never revealing the pain she'd caused him by her rejection. Did she say where he went? Catherine asked desperately. Michael shook his head slowly. He left without much notice. Came in one day, gave his 2 weeks, worked them professionally, and left. Didn't give a forwarding address or say where he was going. But Patricia said something interesting. In his last week, David mentioned something about going home, about wanting to be near family even if they didn't want to be near him. She assumed he meant extended family somewhere, but Michael paused meaningfully. What if he meant your hometown? What if he went back to where everything started? Catherine's breath caught. It made terrible, beautiful sense. After 20 years of running, of hiding, of working in anonymous towns across America, her father would want to return to the place where his family had been, even if that family had rejected him. He's going back, Catherine whispered, or he's already there. Before leaving Marietta, they stopped at a diner near the warehouse that Michael had learned was popular with the workers. Catherine showed David's photo from one of the old letters to their server, and the woman's eyes lit up with recognition. Dave? Oh, sure. He used to come in here almost every day for lunch. Hang on, let me get Jerry. He worked with Dave for years. Minutes later, an older man in his late 60s slid into the booth across from them, his weathered face breaking into a sad smile when he saw the photo. You're looking for Dave Anderson, Jerry said. It wasn't a question. You must be his daughter. He talked about you all the time. I can see the resemblance in the eyes. Catherine's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. Did he tell you why we weren't in contact? Jerry nodded slowly. Not in so many words, but I pieced it together over the 3 years we worked together. Dave was carrying something heavy. You could see it in everything he did. Not just the boxes and freight, but something in his soul. We'd take breaks together, and he'd talk about you sometimes. Said you were brilliant, successful, married to a good man. Said you deserved all the happiness in the world. But there was always this sadness in his voice, this regret. Jerry paused, stirring sugar into his coffee thoughtfully. I asked him once, maybe 2 years ago, why he didn't reach out to you. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, some debts you pay with money, Jerry, and some you pay with distance. I paid both to give her a life free from my mistakes. That's what love looks like sometimes, letting go even when it breaks you. Was he okay? Catherine asked, her voice breaking. I mean health-wise. Did he seem sick? Jerry's expression grew more somber. He was struggling, anyone could see that. His hands shook sometimes, arthritis real bad from years of hard labor. He moved slow, especially in the mornings, like his joints didn't want to cooperate. He took medication. I saw him popping pills a few times during breaks. When I asked about it, he just said it was an old condition he was managing, nothing serious, but I could tell it hurt him more than he let on. The work we did was physical, demanding, and for a man his age dealing with chronic pain, it must have been torture. But he never complained, never missed a shift. Most dedicated worker I've ever known, and I've been in this business 40 years. Do you have any idea where he went? Michael asked, leaning forward with intensity. Jerry thought for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. He didn't say exactly, but in those last few weeks before he left, Dave seemed different, lighter somehow, even though he was clearly in pain. He told me he'd finally finished what he came here to do, that a debt he'd been paying for 20 years was finally clear. Said he was going back to where it all began, that he wanted to spend whatever time he had left near the people he loved, even if he had to love them from a distance. Jerry looked directly at Catherine. He mentioned a town. Let me think. It was somewhere back east, near where you grew up. He said something about wanting to see familiar places one more time, walk streets he used to walk with his family, even if they didn't know he was there. Catherine broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Her father had been here, working himself sick just months ago, speaking of her with love and pride to strangers, planning to return home to be near her even if it meant watching from the shadows. And she'd never known. She'd been living her comfortable life, angry at a man who'd sacrificed everything for her, while he'd been counting down his final payments and dreaming of just being close to her again. Jerry reached across the table, patting her hand with gentle understanding. He loved you more than life itself, young lady. That was clear to everyone who knew him. Whatever happened between you two, whatever kept you apart, I can tell you with absolute certainty that man would have walked through fire for you. In fact, from what I gathered, he pretty much did. They left Marietta with renewed purpose. David had returned to their hometown, or at least that had been his intention 6 months ago. Catherine felt both hope and terror warring in her chest. Hope that they were close to finding him, that she might actually get the chance to tell him she understood, that she loved him, that she was sorry. Terror that 6 months was a long time, that his health might have declined further, that he might have moved again or worse. We're going to find him, Michael said firmly, as if reading her thoughts. He went home, Catherine, back to your town. That's where he wants to be, near you even if you don't know it. We'll search every street, talk to everyone, check every hospital and clinic if we have to. We'll find him. Catherine placed her hand on her pregnant belly, feeling her son move. Your grandfather is waiting, she whispered, and we're coming for him. Catherine and Michael drove straight back to their hometown, the 6-hour journey feeling like an eternity. The moment they arrived, they began searching systematically. Michael called hospitals and clinics, describing David, asking if anyone matching his description had been admitted or treated. On the third call, to the regional medical center on the edge of town, the receptionist paused. We have a David Anderson currently admitted, she said carefully, but I can't provide patient information without authorization. Are you family? Catherine's heart stopped. Yes, she said, her voice shaking. I'm his daughter. Please, I need to see him. Is he okay? Another pause. You should come to the hospital, ma'am. Room 407, 4th floor. The line went dead. Catherine looked at Michael with terror in her eyes. He's there. He's in the hospital. Oh God, what if something's wrong? What if we're too late? They rushed to the hospital, Catherine's pregnant belly making her movements awkward but not slowing her determination. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt endless. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. What if David was dying? What if his chronic condition had finally overwhelmed him? What if she'd arrived just in time to watch him slip away, never having told him she understood, that she loved him, that she was sorry? The elevator doors opened, and they hurried down the corridor, past rooms with closed doors and beeping machines. Room 403, 405, 407. Catherine stopped outside the door, her hand trembling as it reached for the handle. Behind this door was her father, the man she'd hated for 20 years, the man who'd sacrificed everything for her. She took a deep breath, squeezed Michael's hand for courage, and pushed the door open. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. In the bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Catherine remembered, lay David. He was asleep, his face gaunt and deeply lined, his hair more gray than she'd seen at the wedding rehearsal 3 years ago. He looked older than his 58 years, worn down by decades of hard labor and chronic illness. And 4-line ran into his arm. Monitors tracked his vital signs, and his hands, resting on the white hospital blanket, were gnarled and scarred from years of manual work. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. This was her father. This was the man who'd worked himself to breaking to save her, who'd lived in poverty and pain so she could have everything. Tears streamed down her face as she took a tentative step closer to the bed. Catherine moved closer, her legs trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She reached out with a shaking hand and gently touched her father's arm. His skin was warm, alive, real. At her touch, David stirred slightly, his eyes beginning to flutter open. Catherine held her breath, terrified and hopeful all at once. What would he say when he saw her? Would he be angry that she'd found him? Would he send her away, thinking she'd come to reject him again? David's eyes opened fully, unfocused at first, then landing on Catherine's face. For a long moment, he simply stared, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice rough and weak. "Is that really you, or am I dreaming?" "I'm really here, Dad," Catherine choked out, the word dad feeling foreign after 20 years, but also perfectly right. "I'm here. I found the letters. I know everything. I know what you did, what you sacrificed, all of it. And I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't know. Sorry I hated you. Sorry I banned you from my wedding. I'm sorry for every terrible thing I ever said or thought about you." The words poured out of her in a rush. 20 years of misplaced anger dissolving into grief and love. "You didn't abandon us. You saved us. You gave up everything for me, and I was too blind and stubborn to see it. Can you ever forgive me?" David's eyes filled with tears, his weathered face crumpling with emotion. "Forgive you," he said, his voice breaking. "Catherine, there's nothing to forgive. You didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. That was the whole point." David tried to sit up, and Catherine immediately moved to help him, adjusting his pillows with gentle hands. He looked at her with such love and wonder, as if she were a miracle he'd never expected to witness. "I never wanted you to feel guilty," he said softly, reaching up with a trembling hand to touch her face, as if to confirm she was real. "Everything I did because I loved you, because saving your life meant taking on that debt, and honoring that sacrifice meant carrying it alone. I would do it all again, Catherine. Every sleepless night, every painful job, every lonely year. It was worth it to know you were safe, happy, free." His voice grew stronger with emotion. "You became everything I hoped you'd be. An architect, successful, married to a good man. You built a beautiful life. That's all I ever wanted." Catherine took her father's scarred, work-worn hands in hers, feeling the calluses and arthritis that told the story of his sacrifice more clearly than any words could. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," she said through her tears. "If I'd known, I could have helped. We could have faced it together." David shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart. If you'd known, you would have sacrificed your own dreams to help pay the debt. You would have given up college, your career, your future. That debt would have crushed you the way it crushed me. I couldn't let that happen. My job as your father was to give you the best possible life, even if it cost me mine. That's what parents do. They carry the weight so their children can fly." He smiled through his tears. "And you flew, Catherine. You soared. That made every sacrifice worthwhile." "Dad," Catherine said, wiping her eyes and managing a trembling smile. "There's something you need to know. You're going to be a grandfather." She placed her father's hand on her pregnant belly, and David's eyes went wide with wonder and disbelief. You're pregnant?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. As if on cue, the baby kicked against his palm, and David let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Oh my God, a grandson?" Catherine nodded, crying and laughing at the same time. "His name is Daniel, and he's going to know his grandfather. He's going to know what an incredible, selfless, loving man you are. He's going to hear stories about your sacrifice and your strength, and you're going to be part of his life, part of our lives, if you let us back in." David broke down completely, sobbing with a release of 20 years of pain, loneliness, and sacrifice. Catherine carefully wrapped her arms around him, mindful of the 4 lines and monitors, holding him as he cried. "I thought I'd lost you forever," David said between sobs. "I thought you'd hate me until the day I died. I made my peace with that, told myself it was the price of your freedom. But this having you here, knowing you understand, meeting my grandson." He couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. Michael stepped forward, extending his hand to his father-in-law. "Sir, I'm Michael. I'm honored to finally meet you properly. What you did for Catherine, for your family, is the most incredible act of love I've ever witnessed. You're a hero, and you're going to be an amazing grandfather." They sat together for hours as the afternoon faded into evening, talking, crying, healing. David told Catherine about his years of wandering, the jobs he'd worked, the towns he'd passed through. Catherine told him about her life, her career, her marriage, filling in all the gaps he'd missed. She showed him photos on her phone, videos of her and Michael's wedding that Margaret had recorded, moments of her life he'd sacrificed to make possible. "I'm so sorry you had to miss it all," Catherine said softly. "But we're going to make up for lost time. Starting now, when you're released from here, you're coming to live with us. No arguments. You're going to recover in comfort, surrounded by family. You're going to be there when Daniel is born. You're going to walk me down the aisle one more time at a vow renewal ceremony where I can publicly honor you the way you deserve the first time. Your suffering is over, Dad. You're not alone anymore. You're home." David squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with tears of joy. "I'm home," he repeated softly. "I'm finally home." 6 months passed like a beautiful dream. David recovered slowly but steadily under Catherine and Michael's care, moving into their home and becoming part of their daily lives. The chronic condition that had plagued him for years was finally being properly managed with consistent medical care, good nutrition, and the kind of rest he'd denied himself for 2 decades. But more than any medicine, what healed David was love. Being surrounded by family, being needed and wanted, being able to watch his daughter's pregnancy progress day by day. And now, on a bright morning in early spring, Catherine lay in a hospital bed holding her newborn son, Daniel David Anderson, named for the grandfather who'd sacrificed everything. The baby was perfect, healthy, with a head of dark hair and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. David stood beside the bed, looking healthier than he had in years. Regular meals, medical care, and the absence of crushing stress had worked miracles. His hands still bore the scars of decades of labor. His face still showed the lines of hardship, but there was light in his eyes now, joy that had been absent for so long. When the nurse placed baby Daniel in his arms for the first time, David broke down completely. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he looked at his grandson, this tiny miracle that represented everything he'd fought for. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your grandpa, and I promise you, I'm going to be here for every moment. Every birthday, every milestone, every scraped knee, and every triumph. I'm never missing another day." Catherine watched through her own tears, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The weeks that followed were filled with the chaos and beauty of new parenthood. David was there for all of it, changing diapers at 2 in the morning, walking the floors with a fussy baby while Catherine caught precious moments of sleep, sharing the weight and the joy in ways he'd never been able to do when Catherine was born. He told stories of Catherine's own infancy, memories that Linda had shared with him in letters during their years apart, moments that Catherine had never heard. "Your mother wrote to me every month for the first 5 years after I left," David revealed one quiet afternoon while rocking baby Daniel. "She never sent the letters, but she wrote them, kept them all. I found them after she passed, when Margaret helped me sort through things. She told me everything about your life, Catherine. Every achievement, every challenge. Even though we were apart, she made sure I knew my daughter." Catherine had promised her father a second chance, and she kept that promise. 2 months after Daniel was born, they held a small, intimate vow renewal ceremony at the same church where she and Michael had originally married. But this time, David was there. This time, he walked his daughter down the aisle, his arm linked with hers, both of them crying happy tears as they moved toward the altar where Michael waited. Pastor James officiated, his kind face beaming with joy at the healing he'd witnessed. "We gather here not just to renew vows between husband and wife," Pastor James said, "but to witness the renewal of a family torn apart and brought back together by love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. This is what redemption looks like." The small gathering of close friends and family wiped tears as David officially gave his blessing to Catherine and Michael's marriage. During the ceremony, David was given the opportunity to speak, something he'd been denied at the original wedding. He stood at the small podium, his hands gripping the edges to steady himself, and addressed the gathering with a voice that shook with emotion. Most of you know that I missed Catherine's first wedding. What you might not know is why, or what the past 20 years have been like for our family. I made choices, difficult choices, to protect the people I loved. I took on burdens alone because I thought that was what a father should do. And in doing so, I hurt the person I was trying to save. He looked directly at Catherine, his eyes shining. But my daughter, this incredible, strong, compassionate woman, found the truth and chose forgiveness. She chose love, and that choice has given me back my life. Margaret attended the ceremony, seeing David for the first time since Linda's funeral. The reunion between the two was emotional, both carrying years of guilt and grief. I should have told her sooner, Margaret said, holding David's hands. I should have broken my promise to Linda and told Catherine the truth years ago. David shook his head. You kept your word, just like I asked. You honored Linda's wishes and my sacrifice. There's nothing to forgive, Margaret. You helped Catherine find the truth when the time was right. They embraced, two people who'd loved Linda and Catherine in their own ways, finally able to share their grief and their joy openly. The small reception was filled with laughter and tears, stories shared and memories honored, a family knitting itself back together one moment at a time. As the months passed, David embraced his role as grandfather with the enthusiasm of a man making up for lost time. He built toys for Daniel, sang him lullabies, read him stories even though the baby was too young to understand. He documented everything with photos and videos, determined never to miss another moment. Catherine watched her father and son together, seeing the love that flowed between them, and felt her heart heal a little more each day. The anger and resentment she'd carried for 20 years had been replaced by gratitude and awe. Her father was a hero, and now everyone knew it. David had started speaking at local churches and community groups, sharing his story of sacrifice, redemption, and forgiveness. His message resonated with people facing their own impossible choices, offering hope that love could survive even the darkest circumstances. At one such speaking engagement, David stood before a crowd of over 100 people, sharing the story that had once been a secret shame and was now a testimony of unconditional love. I want you to understand something, he said, his voice strong and clear. Sacrifice isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones working in silence, carrying burdens we don't even know exist. For 20 years, I worked in obscurity, missing my daughter's life because I believed that was what love required. I was wrong about one thing, though. I thought love meant doing it alone. But real love, the kind that lasts, requires both sacrifice and vulnerability. It requires the courage to carry weight and the wisdom to share it. He looked at Catherine, sitting in the front row with baby Daniel. My daughter taught me that. She found the truth and chose forgiveness when she had every right to choose bitterness. That's real strength. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Family dinners where 3 generations gathered around the table, David sharing stories from his past that Catherine had never heard. Weekend trips to the park where David pushed Daniel in the swing, the same way he'd pushed Catherine decades ago. Holidays celebrated together, filling the house with the kind of joy and warmth that had been missing for too long. Catherine's architecture firm was thriving, Michael's law practice was growing, and David had found purpose in his speaking engagements and volunteer work with organizations that helped families struggling with medical debt. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something meaningful, lessons learned and wisdom earned through suffering. Every day felt like a gift, a second chance they'd almost missed. One evening, Catherine and David sat together looking through the letters that had changed everything, reading them now not with pain, but with understanding and appreciation. I'm going to save these for Daniel, Catherine said softly. When he's old enough, I want him to read them. I want him to know what real love looks like, what real sacrifice means. I want him to understand that his grandfather is a hero, not because he did something flashy or famous, but because he loved so deeply he was willing to disappear to save the people he cared about most. David squeezed her hand, his eyes misty. And I wanted to know about his grandmother too, about Linda, how she kept a secret that broke her heart because she believed in my mission, how she loved you enough to let you hate me if it meant you could heal and grow. They sat in comfortable silence, 3 generations under one roof, a family restored. Sometimes we judge what we don't understand. But when truth is revealed, we discover that the greatest heroes are those who love in silence, who sacrifice without recognition, and who forgive without being asked. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible tales that remind us what really matters. Family, forgiveness, and the kind of love that conquers all.